Welcome to Here and Now. I'm your host, Judith St. Croix, and this is the program which looks into the musical mind. Today I'll be interviewing distinguished American composer Marga Richter. We've been listening to the cadenza from her piano concerto, Landscapes of the Mind, and now the rest of the program will be devoted to looking into the life and creative process behind that work. Marga Richter, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
This piece was just performed in Atlanta with the Atlanta Symphony. And how did it go?
It was stunning. It was a marvelous experience. I was there.
You were happy?
Performances were great, and the audience was great.
The audience enjoyed it?
They really did.
Now, this work is a monumental work. It takes 30 minutes to perform. It took over 4.5 years to compose. It's been hailed by critics and audience members alike as a masterpiece.
Yes.
What went into the inspiration of this work?
Well, the absolute genesis of the piece was quite remarkable, I think. I was taking a rest between, I just finished a large ballet score. I sat down to read Life magazine and take it easy for a couple of days. And I came across the pictures, an article about Georgia O'Keeffe.
So we have the very magazine here, right?
Oh, yes, I saved this.
This is what you saw when you sat down to read the mail.
Right,
You're going to take a rest, right?
Right, I was going to take a rest. I was sitting at the dining room table reading this magazine, and I came to these paintings in the middle of this article about Georgia O'Keeffe. And I was very struck by this one because of the beautiful colors and the cleanness of it. It doesn't look like a bone, pelvis bone with a sky through it, you know. And then I came to this one. And the floating quality here, you can see how it goes off into the horizon, the suspended motion. And I didn't go any further. Got up from the table, went to the piano, started to write this piano concerto, trying to capture the feeling in this particular painting of just being floating and, you know, nothing definite happening.
So there wasn't much of a rest for you?
No, about an hour, I'd say.
About an hour between the ballet score and,
right.
and the piano concerto. How do things go from there? Once you sit down at the piano and you start playing, where does it start? Where do your fingers go? How does it happen?
Oh, that's a question that's very hard to answer. I think you have an image in your mind, or I do, and I can keep it there for 1.5 years if I need to, just by entering that same atmosphere whenever I sit down to work. Things seem to happen while you sleep, you know, subconsciously, and explore all these avenues. Before I started this work, I had thought that I would like to write a piece, a piano piece, incorporating all the excitement of Indian music. And so while I was writing the first part of this concerto, I knew that I was going to end up with an Indian raga. I didn't know how I was going to get there. It was quite an adventure. But when the time came, I knew I was there. And the last 10 minutes is Indian. It's not Indian music. It's my attempt to capture that kind of excitement.
And what is a raga exactly? What does it mean?
Raga in the scale, very simplistically, means a scale. It means a lot of other things. There are hundreds of them, and they have certain attributes attributed to them. I didn't pay much attention to that. I picked this particular one, which has a name, which is a lot like my name, Marwa, Marga. I happen to like this particular raga because of the dissonant tones here and here. If you start on C, you go to D flat, against what's always present in Indian music is drone.
The drone is what?
Just to repeat one particular tone throughout the whole piece.
And they have an instrument that's just devoted to that, isn't that right?
Yes, when you hear just solo Indian music, like on the sitar, in the background there's a tambura,
and the
which
tambura is
plucks
playing
constantly the drone tone.
Right.
And
did you use the drone at all in the concerto?
I did. I used it in many instruments, but I also called for a tambura.
You have a tambura in the orchestra?
Yes, but most orchestras don't have a tambura.
What do they do about that?
Well, they do various things. The first performance, we took drumsticks and hit the strings of a grand piano, an orchestral piano, the top off, and that served pretty well. The second time it was played, which was in Atlanta, we actually used a sitar. which is a pretty good substitute for a tambura.
I understand there's electric guitars in this score as well, right?
Yes.
There seems to be a real feeling from the 60s here. 1968 was when you opened up this magazine. I remember my own initiation into Indian music with Ravi Shankar, those things coming for the first time to my attention in the 60s. You know, when I was in school, we actually sang some ragas. We actually did solfege with them. Should we give it a try?
Sure.
And
I'll drone if you'll.
You drone if I sing? Okay.
Right.
All right. Let's give ourselves a C here. Okay. All right. Sa re ga ma da ni sa. Okay. I'll try it going down. Sa ni da ma ga re sa.
Very good.
Oh. Okay.
We could tour.
All right. So you were talking about choosing this raga because of certain tensions. You want to point that out?
Yes, I particularly like what we just did. The D flat against the C gives a very clashing kind of tense energy.
And of course, if you hold two tones that close together, they actually vibrate.
Right. And then you go to the F sharp, which is another interval that is not very restful. It's very unstable. It gives a lot of sense of motion. You have to keep going.
In fact, if you go sa, sa, ma. You know, in the Middle Ages, they wouldn't allow that interval. It was outlawed. But we've been liberated. Okay.
So I found that I had a lot of opportunity for the kind of music I normally write, which is quite dissonant. At the same time, I have the drone, which gives me a good tonal center. And what you do with this, you don't just repeat the scale up and down. You have to ornament it.
Okay, can we look right at the score here and see where you've used the raga?
Well, here's our E, F sharp.
This is the piano.
2 notes.
We're looking at the piano
Right.
solo part, right?
Where you have an ornamentation on the various scale tones, and they eventually went up to C, E. This time we had the F sharp, skip up to B, C, and the next time, which I did a lot in this piece, end up on the C sharp, which is the same as the D flat. So that against my droning C's here, and in the tambura part, keep up that tension.
And that you just pointed out, if we can see that,
Yes.
that's the tambura droning.
Yes,
That's
right.
the drone C. Okay, now can we look down at the contrabass part, way at the bottom, and what have you done there?
There we have the basic raga scale going descending over and over and over, all the way to the end of the piece, which is about 3-4 more pages, which gives a contrasting motion to the piano part's going up and the bass is going down, the tambura is staying in the middle.
Now you mentioned that you could hold an image in your mind for a long time if you had to, but how do you sustain the creative imagination over 4.5 years? It seems impossible to some people, I think, to keep yourself focused for that amount of time to create a work like this.
Well, it may be difficult for some people. It seems to be something I can do. It's like a person appearing in a Broadway show or play. They have to, every night at 7 or 8 o'clock, put themselves into that character and be that.
And do it.
For 3 hours, and then they go out and eat pizza and go home and act like everybody else.
And so if there's a correlation.
Right.
So for so many hours a day,
right.
you would go into that world of this landscape,
Exactly.
this concerto, and you would be there and then come out and have dinner.
One way I keep the music continuity in it is that I start from the beginning of the piece every day. Maybe 10 times. If I get stuck, I go back to the beginning and go from the beginning.
So you would be playing the beginning and then working along
and
to
add
the point.
to it, and if that works, as long as it works, I keep that up and I start over again, so that the piece, even though it takes a long time to write, it has a certain rhythmic continuity and emotional continuity.
Because you're always starting from the beginning
Right.
and working your way through. Then when you get to the point where the piece is 25 minutes long, you have a long...
It's one side of a record and you quit.
Right, that's enough. Did that influence your decision on the length?
No, I was hoping to make an hour-long piece. I thought when I got to the raga section, I would write an Indian raga. They go on for hours and hours and hours. But after about 10 minutes, it just wound up, and one day I said, gee, that's the end. I mean, this is it. So I quit.
In 1953, you married Alan Skelly, and you had 2 children. Maureen and Michael, and you moved out to Long Island, where you still live, in Huntington, Long Island. Is that where you compose? Do you have a studio outside of the home, or do you write at home?
No, I work right about there. My piano's right inside that window.
And in this particular work, your daughter Maureen played a very special part. What was that?
Well, she is seen here playing a sitar. It's a long story. But in fact, we have in the studio today the exact instrument that's in that picture. And I don't play this, but I'll play a couple of tones just to see how it sounds.
Okay.
Or I just love it when it goes out there and comes back. I just love it. The sound just gets to me. I had picked up an Indian music record back in 1967 or 8 and played it a lot at home. And suddenly one day my 10-and-a-half or 11-year-old daughter, I guess she was, said, "I'd like a sitar for Christmas." And I said, "How am I going to find a sitar in Huntington, Long Island? I'm not going to New Delhi, India to get one." The very next day I saw one hanging in a music store in Long Island. So, of course, you know, I bought it for her.
Did she
Children
study?
always get what they want, so she got the sitar.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, oh, certainly. Yes, then we found a teacher in New York, and then we outgrew him, and she had a teacher in Wesleyan, Connecticut. And when she went to college, she went to India. And
she actually went to India?
She went to India. She spent 3 years studying sitar in India and married an Indian and brought him home. So, you know, you go out and buy one record and you gain an Indian son-in-law.
It's an amazing story. What about your son, Michael? He's also involved with music, we see by these pictures.
Yes, he started singing when he was a year old, playing the piano when he was 2.5, reading music when he was 3. And today he's an accomplished pianist, and he teaches at Columbia University, gives concerts. And sometimes he and I play four-hand music, my own and my two-piano music.
That must be wonderful.
And that is really very thrilling, very exciting.
What about your husband? How does he figure into the musical life, this musical family?
His profession is professor of philosophy at C.W. Post on Long Island. He is very musical, and he's our staunchest supporter. Helps us get through all those concerts. He's very calm, and the rest of us are running around. And he's been a big help to me.
Now, besides the home in Long Island, you also have a beautiful place in Vermont. And do you find any difference between your composing when you're out in the country, up in the mountains, and in Vermont than in Long Island?
The difference is that there are many fewer interruptions. We purposely have no telephone in Vermont. And we're both on vacation, and I can just spend as many hundreds of hours all day long as I want to. So that I think the energy and the continuity of work is greater there. The piano is worse.
The piano's worse?
Much worse. The view is beautiful, absolutely gorgeous.
Now, there was an early musical influence in your life, which was in the form of your mother.
Yeah.
And she was American-born but sang opera in Germany, isn't that right?
Yes. She had her operatic career just before and after and during the First World War. I have pictures here of her in 3 different operas. This is Mignon. This one I don't remember. It's a so-called trouser role where the soprano wears men's clothing. And here she is as the Gypsy Baron. Very dramatic shot. I love that one because I sort of remember seeing her like that at the ironing board, you know. And she brought her operatic skills to the home, I think.
So that's maybe where you got some of your sense of drama.
I think probably, yes. She's performed during my childhood, and she was a great role model.
And your father was from Germany, and he actually saw your mother singing and met her in that way. And he's here with his family in Germany.
He's the youngest member, male member here behind his mother.
But then the family moved back to Wisconsin, where you were born, and then finally into Minnesota, Robbinsdale, Minnesota, where you grew up, and had a brother and a sister. But what about you? When did you start composing? What was the age when you started feeling that
I would say about
urge?
10. I had piano lessons. I played since I was about 4. And when nobody was around, I would start to improvise, just melodically, which I still think is the most important part of my music, is the melodic aspect. Nobody taught me anything about harmony. And I think maybe that was a good thing, because then I found my own way.
And that way was helped by you coming to Juilliard when you...
Yes, the family decided when I was 17 that it's time to go to New York. So they sold the business, which was a newspaper, the house.
And the whole family went with you?
The whole family, including the dog and the piano.
Well, that is support.
Came to New York.
That really is support.
And when I was safely launched in New York 4 or 5 years later, they turned around and went back home.
And now we're going to turn around and get back to the Peekskill Performing Arts Center, where we saw you performing the cadenza from the piano concerto. We're going to go back to the Performing Arts Center, and Marga Richter is going to discuss with me some of the aspects of her concerto that we've discussed here and play them on the piano. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your life and creative vision. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
We're at the Paramount Center for the Performing Arts in Peekskill, New York. And Marga Richter is here. She's going to be playing segments of the concerto, Landscapes of the Mind, which we were just discussing. Now, of course, the concerto has a full orchestra behind it, but the orchestra isn't here today. We're only going to be listening to the piano segments. And to start out, I'd like Marga to play the thing that first inspired her, the very first notes she played when she sat down at the piano after looking at the Georgia O'Keeffe painting. This also happens to be the very beginning of the piece. That's really so breathtaking and exquisitely fragile. Does the piece keep on like that, in that mood, or does it change? How does it go from there?
does both of those things. There are basically 12 short sections in the first part of the piece. And some of them are quiet, and many of them have big climaxes. The last of those sections is the biggest climax, and right after that we have a bridge into the raga section.
So what's that transition like when you go from this first section to the...
Well, it's interesting that I needed a little bridge section before the raga just burst upon us. And I started with the notes of the raga. But after I'd written it, I realized that the rhythm and the general melodic shape was very much akin to a Bob Dylan song that I happen to love very much called Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands.
And this fact that the notes of the raga and the notes of that song is purely coincidental?
Actually, the notes I use don't sound very much like that song to anybody but me. I'll play it for you, see if you recognize it. I think you know the Dylan song. And then I'll go right into the beginning of the raga, where the left hand begins its drone on C. And for the next 10 minutes, the left hand pretty much plays some kind of C.
Before you start, could you just refresh our memory and play a little bit of the raga so we have that in mind?
Okay, I'll play the bridge section and the beginning of the raga. Develops and gets louder, faster.
Now, the cadenza of a concerto is a place where the soloist gets to shine, the orchestra drops out, and then it's just the solo piano playing in a very exaggerated and exciting manner. So we're going to hear the cadenza now and then go on into the end of the piece. And does the orchestra stay out till the end, or what happens to the orchestra?
The last minute of the piece, the orchestra comes roaring back in, lots of drums and timpani and strings, and I may throw my hand in the air, so
we'll know
when that is.
Okay.
I kind of wanted to mention that the left-hand part, which stays on C for a while, and then plays a couple of C's, and then extends to a higher C and a lower C, and faster, and so forth. Eventually takes off and plays a couple of other notes, which is one of the important points in the piece. And then at the very end, we have a couple of melodic fragments that signal sort of an end of a phrase. We have or, which gives me my C against my C sharp,
Well, I've already picked my favorite. Why don't you pick yours, and let's see how she ends this very exciting work.